Welcome to ND Love Story, where love stories are told with raw emotions and captivating storytelling. If you enjoy heartfelt and mesmerizing love stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to ND Love Story so you won't miss any episode. James Wilder, a freshman, stepped onto the New York University campus feeling both excited and nervous. Coming from a small town in Kansas, he never imagined leaving home to move to a big city full of opportunity and hustle. On his first day at the dorms, James wheeled his suitcase up to the door of room 306, wondering what his roommate would be like. When the door opened, James was immediately struck by the neat yet personal atmosphere. Natural light poured through a large window, highlighting abstract paintings on the walls and a shelf packed with design books. Sitting in a small armchair near the desk, his roommate, Elliot Grayson, was sketching on a drawing pad. Elliot glanced up at James's arrival and offered a warm, genuine smile that instantly put him at ease. "Hey, you must be James," Elliot said, his voice friendly and steady. "I'm Elliot. Welcome to the big city." James tried to return the smile as he stepped inside. "Thanks, I've never been to New York before, so I'll probably need some guidance." Elliot nodded, his smile unwavering. "No problem, I'm from pretty far away, too. You'll settle in faster than you think." What seemed like a simple introduction turned out to be the beginning of a story James could never have anticipated. After the first week living together, James realized that college life was nothing like he'd imagined. The demanding classes, endless essays, and adjusting to the fast pace of the city left him feeling adrift. But whenever he returned to the dorm and saw Elliot at his desk, or heard him joke about everyday situations, James felt more at ease. Elliot carried himself with confidence and had a magnetic energy about him. Yet there were also quiet moments where he simply sat sketching or laughing softly. In those times, James felt like he was stepping into another world, one where he didn't have to try to be anyone else. One afternoon, after finishing his classes, James came back to find Elliot working on a poster for an upcoming art event. The poster was striking, but Elliot's expression showed frustration. "Need a hand?" James asked hesitantly. Elliot looked up, surprised but appreciative. "Actually, I'm stuck on the lettering. I want it to stand out, but I can't figure out how." James stepped closer, studying the poster. "Maybe try a simpler font? That way the image stands out more, and the text just needs to be clear." Elliot paused before breaking into a smile. "You're right, I get so caught up in the details that I forget the basics." "Thanks, James." That moment made James feel something warm stir inside. Elliot wasn't just a roommate, he was becoming a real friend. Someone who gave James encouragement and whom he could also help in return. In the days that followed, their conversations grew more frequent. James would watch Elliot draw and ask about his techniques, while Elliot grew curious about James's life back in Kansas. "Did you ever draw at home?" Elliot asked one evening, catching James off guard. "Not really. I only drew as a kid, and I never thought I was any good," James admitted. "Well, maybe you should try again. Just for fun, no pressure," Elliot suggested. Those words stayed with James, and one evening after watching Elliot work, he decided to pick up drawing again. His lines were rough, but he felt a spark of excitement knowing that someone believed in his abilities. Another evening, Elliot invited James to join him at a campus art exhibition. James hesitated. He'd never been to something like that before, but Elliot's enthusiasm convinced him. When they arrived, the exhibition was bright and bustling, filled with imaginative artwork. Elliot seemed completely at home, chatting with professors, laughing with friends, and even joking with a visiting artist. James lingered quietly in the background, observing. "What do you think?" Elliot asked, his eyes lighting up as he talked about the pieces on display. "It's different from what I'm used to," James said, "but really interesting." Elliot grinned. "That's why I wanted you to come. You'll see the world is bigger than what you know. And who knows, maybe someday your work will be on display." James didn't reply, but something inside him shifted. Conversations with Elliot weren't just helping him adjust to college, they were challenging the limits James had set for himself. In the glow of the exhibition lights, James realized Elliot wasn't just a roommate. He was someone opening a new world to James. One full of emotion, possibility, and hope. As the weeks went on, James and Elliot's relationship grew naturally. Though unspoken, James began looking forward to their evenings together. Elliot would sit sketching or refining a project, while James pretended to study, occasionally sneaking glances at Elliot. Sometimes Elliot caught him watching and smiled, a small, warm smile that sent a flutter through James's chest. One evening, while Elliot was cutting and arranging a poster for a new project, James decided to start a conversation. "Did you always know you wanted to be an artist?" James asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Elliot paused, his eyes lingering on the poster before turning to James. "Not always, but I've always loved drawing. It's like, there's nothing else I'd rather do." "Sounds like you never doubted yourself," James said, attempting to conceal the admiration in his voice. "Not true," Elliot said softly. "I've had my moments of doubt, wondering if I was good enough, if it was worth continuing. But what's important is that I always find a reason to keep going." James stayed silent, reflecting on Elliot's words. He wondered if he could ever find something he was that passionate about. "I think you have that, too," Elliot suddenly said, his eyes full of encouragement as they met James's. "You might not see it yet, but I notice the way you pay attention to details, how you observe things. Don't underestimate that." James gave a small smile, feeling as if Elliot had seen through him. "Thanks. I never thought I had that kind of potential." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe it's time you started believing it. Everyone needs someone who believes in them. And if you don't yet, I'll be that person." Those simple words, which seemed like nothing more than encouragement, stirred a strange and deep emotion in James. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something else, something harder to define. From then on, James found himself spending more time around Elliot, not just because of the support Elliot offered, but because being near him felt calming. On their walks around campus, James noticed how differently Elliot saw the world. He'd point out small, easily overlooked things. A flower growing through a sidewalk crack, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves. Elliot had a way of turning the most ordinary details into part of a larger, more beautiful picture. One evening, while they were watching one of Elliot's favorite films, James blurted out, "I wish I had your confidence. I always feel like I'm just one person in a crowd of thousands." Elliot looked at James with a softness James had never seen before. "I don't think you're just one in a crowd. I think you're more special than you realize. Maybe you just haven't allowed yourself to see it yet." James chuckled quietly, unsure how to respond, but after the movie ended, he couldn't stop thinking about what Elliot had said. He hadn't just said it to be nice, Elliot genuinely seemed to believe it. For the first time, James began wondering if he could be someone else, someone more confident, more willing to take risks, someone who might, one day, be brave enough to face how he truly felt about Elliot. Everything between James and Elliot suddenly became more complicated when one of Elliot's old friends, Lauren, appeared. One day, James came back to the room after class, opened the door, and saw Lauren sitting on Elliot's bed. She had red hair, an air of confidence, and wore a stylish long coat. She smiled as James walked in. "Oh, is this your roommate?" Lauren asked, her voice warm and friendly. But James couldn't help feeling the atmosphere in the room shift. "Yeah, this is James," Elliot replied, still smiling. But James noticed how warmly Elliot looked at Lauren. Something in his expression made James's chest tighten. "Nice to meet you," Lauren said, extending her hand. James, caught off guard, quickly shook it. After a brief exchange of introductions, Lauren turned back to Elliot, and the two began reminiscing about their high school days in Chicago. James sat at his desk, pretending to read, but his ears couldn't help picking up their conversation. Over the next few days, Lauren was around more often. She invited Elliot out for coffee, to see art exhibits, and sometimes they stayed out late talking. While Elliot didn't seem distant, James couldn't help feeling like their private time had been disrupted. One evening, James couldn't keep it in anymore. When Elliot came back, James was waiting. "Who's Lauren, exactly?" James asked directly, though his voice wavered. Elliot looked surprised at James's tone but answered calmly, "She's an old friend. We went to high school together. And she's just in town for a few days for work." "A few days?" James repeated, realizing too late how suspicious his voice sounded. "I'm not saying you shouldn't see old friends. It's just..." Elliot stepped closer, tilting his head. "It's just what, James?" James hesitated, unable to admit the jealousy bubbling inside him. He wasn't even sure if it was jealousy or something more confusing. It's nothing, he said finally, shaking his head. Elliot studied him for a long moment before responding gently. James, if something's bothering you, you can tell me, but I need you to trust me. There's nothing between Lauren and me beyond friendship. James nodded, though his thoughts were still tangled. Even so, Elliot's words made him breathe a little easier. Lauren might be just a friend, but Elliot always took the time to show James he cared, to listen and understand. Yet this encounter made James realize one thing. He needed to understand his own feelings more clearly and figure out what he truly wanted from this relationship. The silence following their conversation about Lauren left James feeling like something was unresolved. Though Elliot insisted he and Lauren were only friends, the lingering jealousy James felt didn't go away. He began to recognize that his feelings for Elliot had grown beyond what was normal. But he didn't know how to face it. One night, a heavy rainstorm rolled in, and the dorm's power suddenly went out. James and Elliot were left in a pitch-dark room, the only light coming from Elliot's small flashlight. Rain pounded against the windows, creating a strangely intimate atmosphere. Elliot sat on his bed, James at his desk. Neither spoke. The silence was so thick that James could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Elliot broke the quiet. I feel like you've been upset the last few days. Is it because of Lauren? His voice was calm, but James could hear the sincerity in every word. James hesitated, drumming his fingers on the desk as if to muster the courage. Not exactly. I think I've just been overthinking things. Then say it out loud, Elliot encouraged, leaning back against the wall. In the dim light, his gaze was gentle and patient. James took a deep breath. Elliot, I'm not sure about how I've been feeling lately. I never thought about liking someone like you before. His voice grew quieter with each word, but every syllable felt heavier. Elliot watched him silently, not interrupting. I've always been used to questioning whether I'm good enough. James continued, and when you help me, when you encourage me, I realized I don't see you as just a friend. But I don't know what it means. The room fell still. Then Elliot spoke softly. I've thought about it a lot. James, I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for. But I do think the most important thing is that we're honest with ourselves. James looked up, meeting Elliot's sincere gaze. So, what do you feel? He asked, his voice trembling. Elliot moved closer, sitting beside him. I like you, James, but I don't want you to feel pressured. I just want us to keep being friends. Keep helping each other. And if you feel comfortable, we can let time figure the rest out. Elliot's words lifted a weight off James's shoulders. He still wasn't completely certain of his feelings, but Elliot's understanding gave him peace. In the darkness, James let out a small smile. Thank you, Elliot. I think I just need more time, but I really appreciate you. Elliot placed a hand on James's shoulder, a simple yet comforting gesture. It's okay, James. I'm here. Outside, the rain started to ease, and the power slowly returned, pushing away the darkness. Though the room was no longer shrouded in shadow, there was still something intangible hanging in the air between James and Elliot, a quiet understanding. A feeling that didn't need words. For the first time in days, James felt a sense of calm, even if everything between them wasn't yet completely clear. In the days that followed, they returned to their usual routines. James focused on his studies, while Elliot dove back into his art projects. But there was a subtle change that James couldn't ignore. Elliot's glances seemed to linger a little longer. His offhand remarks carried a bit more meaning. Each night, as they sat in their room working, the atmosphere felt easier, more relaxed, and no longer weighed down by tension. One evening, Elliot surprised James by handing him a small notebook. I think you should use this, he said, for writing, for drawing, or just to jot down whatever you're feeling. James held the notebook, touched by its simplicity and sincerity. Thank you, Elliot. No need to thank me. Elliot replied with a grin. It's just a notebook, but I think you have a lot to share with yourself, and maybe, if you want, with me. James looked at Elliot, feeling for the first time that while he might not have all the answers, one thing was certain. Elliot's presence made him feel safe, hopeful, and, above all, more like himself. Time passed, and James and Elliot settled into a steady, meaningful rhythm. They didn't rush, didn't make grand promises, but allowed their connection to grow naturally. James found himself becoming more confident. He started trying new things, writing down his thoughts in the notebook. joining Elliot at art exhibitions, and finding joy in small achievements. One late afternoon, as they sat on a bench near the campus pond, Elliot looked over at James and gently asked, "James, do you think this is what feels right to you? I mean, does this feel like the kind of relationship where you can just be yourself?" James turned to look at Elliot, his eyes warm and honest. "I think this is what I've always been looking for, even if I didn't realize it at first. With you, I don't have to try to be anyone else. I can just be me." Elliot smiled, his usual confidence softened into something more tender. "I feel the same, and if you're ready, I'd like us to keep writing this story together." Slowly, but meaningfully, James nodded, a smile spreading across his face, his happiness impossible to hide. They sat there together, silent, but no more words were needed. In that moment, James knew their journey, though just beginning, was one he was ready to take with Elliot, without fear. Without doubt, just trust and a love that would continue to grow.